All right, hello everyone. Today we're going to be starting out at Rise Above Read Aloud with the Iliad, or This Black Ships Before Troy, the version by Rosemary Sutcliffe. If you missed the introduction, go back and listen to that so you have some backstory on all of this, because we're just going to hop right in. Maybe the only thing I would say is I'm going to show you the pictures as we go along. So this will be the chapter 1 that I'll get on the screen so you can see what's going on, see me peeking behind the book. But then I'm going to put it down on my little reading case so I can read while we're together. Cool? So, first one, the golden apple. That's our first picture and page. So here we go. In the high and far-off days when men were heroes and walked with the gods, Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, took for his wife a sea nymph called Thetis, Thetis of the silver feet. Many guests came to their wedding feast, and among the mortal guests, or the human guests, came all the gods of high Olympus. So there's the gods, and then there's mortals, the human beings. But as they sat feasting, one who had not been invited was suddenly in their midst. She was just there. Eris, the goddess of discord, had been left out because wherever she went, she took trouble with her. Yet here she was, all the same, and in her blackest mood, to avenge the insult. All she did, it seemed a small thing, was to toss down on the table a golden apple. Then she breathed upon the guest once and vanished away. Let me show you this picture again, because that looks like that is her, right? Giving the apple. Kind of silly me trying to hold this up and peek at the same time. So she just left that apple. The apple lay gleaming among the piled fruits and the brimming wine cups. These gods love to drink wine, by the way. And bending close to look at it, everyone could see the words, "To the fairest," traced on its side. So you can imagine an apple and it says "to the fairest," which is basically like "to the most beautiful." Then the three greatest of the goddesses each claimed that it was hers. Like, no, it's mine. Hera claimed it as wife to Zeus, the All-Father, and queen of all the gods. So she's like, it's mine. My husband's like, he's the top dog. He's the highest of everyone. It's mine. I'm the fairest. Athena claimed that she had the better right, for the beauty of wisdom such as hers surpassed all else. So Athena's the goddess of wisdom. Aphrodite only smiled and asked who had a better claim to beauty's prize than the goddess of beauty herself. They fell to arguing among themselves. The argument became a quarrel, and the quarrel grew more and more bitter, and each called upon the assembled guests to judge between them. So there's all these guests at the party. Hey, all of you guys, which one of us is the fairest out of these three goddesses? But the other guests refused, for they knew well enough that whichever goddess they chose to receive the golden apple, they would make enemies of the other two. In the end, the three took the quarrel home with them to Olympus. So Olympus is the place where the gods live. You know, we don't know if it's a real place. We can think of it as like Mount Olympus with these giant mountains in Greece, or are, and maybe the gods lived at the top of them. That's what they kind of believe, potentially. Anyhow, in Olympus, the other gods took sides, some with one and some with the other, and the ill will between them dragged on for a long while. More than long enough in the world of men for a child born when the quarrel first began to grow to manhood and become a warrior or a herdsman. But the immortal gods do not know time as mortals know it. Now on the northeast coast of the Aegean Sea, there was a city of men. So I want to put this up on the screen now so you can see. There you go. So I don't know if you can see my cursor moving. We'll have to see later. But on the northeast coast, you can see right there Troy, where it says Asia Minor. Right next to it, right by the sea, is a place called Troy. That's where a lot of our action is going to take place. So that's what they're talking about here. Okay? I'll leave that up for a moment as I talk about this. Now, on the northeast coast of the Aegean Sea, there was a city of men. Troy was its name, a great city surrounded by strong walls and standing on a hill hard by the shore. It had grown rich on the tolls that its kings demanded from merchant ships passing up the nearby straits to the Black Sea cornlands and down again. So you can see there's a little waterway above Troy that it's like a passageway. So they would start charging people to come through that passageway. All right. Priam, who was now king, was lord of wide realms and long-manned horses, and he had many sons about his hearth, or like the fireplace. So a hearth is like a fireplace. And when the quarrel about the golden apple was still raw and new, a last son was born to him and his wife, Queen Hecuba, and they called him Paris. So I'm going to take this off now. So they had a son named Paris. There should have been great rejoicing and excitement. But while Hecuba still carried the babe within her, the soothsayers, kind of like a fortune teller, had foretold that she would give birth to a firebrand that should burn down Troy, like a troublemaker, and he's gonna burn the whole city down. And so, when he was born and named, the king bade a servant carry him out into the wilderness and leave him to die. The servant did as he was bid or told, but a herdsman, searching for a missing calf, found the babe and brought him up as his own. So somebody was out there, saw the baby and said, well, I'm not going to let this baby die. I'm going to bring this baby up. Here's the next picture on the page. There we go. Man, I'm trying to get this right. We'll get this right. The boy grew tall and strong and beautiful, the swiftest runner and the best archer in all the country around. So his boyhood passed among the oak woods and the high hill pastures that rose towards Mount Ida. And there he met and fell in love with a wood nymph called Oenone, who loved him in return. She had the gift of being able to heal the wounds of mortal men, of human beings, no matter how sorely they were hurt. So this Oenone could, if you had a cut, she could heal you. If you were almost dying, she could kind of bring you back to life. So she's got these magical powers. Among the oak woods, they lived together and were happy. Until one day, the three jealous goddesses, still quarreling about their golden apple, chanced to look down from Olympus and saw the beautiful young man herding his cattle on the slopes of Mount Ida. They knew, for the gods know all things, that he was the son of Priam, king of Troy, though he himself did not know it yet. But the thought came to them that he would not know who they were, and therefore he would not be afraid to judge between them. They were growing somewhat weary of the argument by then, like they wanted somebody to choose. So they tossed the apple down to him, and Paris put up his hands and caught it. After it, the three came down, landing before him so lightly that their feet did not bend the mountain grasses, and bade him choose between them which was the fairest and had best right to the prize he held in his hand. Remember, here's the three goddesses. Can you see which one is which? I wonder if you're thinking about it. First, Athena, in her gleaming armor, fixed him with sword-grade eyes and promised him supreme wisdom if he would name her. Then Hera, in her royal robes as queen of heaven, promised him vast wealth and power and honor if he awarded her the prize. Lastly, Aphrodite drew near, her eyes as blue as deep sea water, her hair like spun gold wreathed around her head, and, smiling honey sweet, she whispered that she would give him a wife as fair as herself if he tossed the apple to her. What do you guys think? Who is Paris going to choose? Right, out of these three. And Paris forgot the other two with their offers of wisdom and power, forgot also, for that moment, dark-haired Oenone in the shadowed oak woods, and he gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, so the goddess of beauty. There are no pictures on this next page, the next two pages. Then Athena and Hera were angry with him for refusing them the prize, just as the wedding guests had known that they would be. And both of them were angry with Aphrodite. But Aphrodite was well content and set about keeping her promise to the herdsman who was a king's son. She put a certain thought into the heads of some of King Priam's men, so that they came cattle raiding at the full of the moon and drove off Paris's big, beautiful herd bull, who was lord of all the cattle. So Aphrodite seems to have this ability where she can get you to do something that maybe you weren't going to do before, by like speaking in your mind or something like that. So then Paris left the hills and came down into Troy, seeking his bull. And there Hecuba, his mother, chanced to see him, and knew by his likeness to his brothers and by something in her own heart that he was the son she had thought dead and lost to her in his babyhood. She wept for joy and brought him before the king. And seeing him living and so good to look upon, this is a good-looking dude here, all men forgot the prophecy that he was a troublemaker and he was going to, light Troy on fire. And they forgot all that. And Priam welcomed him into the family and gave him a house of his own, like each of the other Trojan princes. There he lived wherever he would, but at other times he would be away back to the oak woods of Mount Ida, to his love Oenone. And so things went on happily enough for a while. But meantime, across the Aegean Sea, now let me put up that map again so you can see what's going on. Okay, so you can see the Aegean Sea right there in the middle. So across the Aegean Sea, another wedding had taken place, the marriage of King Menelaus of Sparta to the princess Helen, whom men called Helen of the Fair Cheeks, the most beautiful of all mortal women. So if you look down, maybe towards the bottom left, you'll see at the foot there, it's this little thing, Sparta. I don't know if the pointer is working, so you're going to have to do a little work in your own eyes, see if you can find Sparta over there on the bottom left or towards the bottom left. So that is where Menelaus lives, and he has his princess, Helen, who's a human being, right? She's not a goddess. Her beauty was famous throughout the kingdoms of Greece, and many kings and princes had wished to marry her. Among them, Odysseus, whose kingdom was the rocky island of Ithaca. So if you found Sparta and you go up towards your left, you'll see Ithaca. It's hard to kind of read, but if the far left middle, you'll see the Ionian Sea. It's right around there at Ithaca. And that is where Odysseus lives and rules. Okay, so Helen's father would have none of them, but gave her to Menelaus. Yet, because he feared trouble between her suitors at a later time, so the men who wanted to marry her, he caused them all to swear that they would stand with her husband for her sake, if ever he had need of them. So they made a pact. They all kind of shook hands and made an agreement. If there's ever trouble, if Menelaus ever has trouble, all of them need to come together to help. Or if there's ever trouble for Helen, all of them come together and help. Make sense? And between Helen and Odysseus, who married her cousin Penelope, so Helen had a cousin Penelope, Odysseus married her, and loved her well, there was a lasting friendship that stood her in good stead when she had sore need of a friend years afterward. Even beyond the furthest bounds of Greece, the fame of Helen's beauty traveled until it came at last to Troy, as Aphrodite had known that it would. So you can see that it crossed the word of this woman's beauty. Everybody was spreading everywhere. So it crossed all the way to the Aegean Sea from Sparta all the way over to Troy. And Paris no sooner heard of her than he determined to go and see for himself if she was indeed as fair as men said, as beautiful as men said. Oenone wept and begged him to stay with her, but he paid her no heed, and his feet came no more up the track to her woodland cave. If Paris wanted a thing, then he must have it. So he begged a ship from his father, and he and his companions set out. All the length of the Aegean Sea was before them, and the winds blew them often from their true course. But they came at last to their landfall and ran the ship up the beach and climbed the long hill tracks that brought them to the fortress palace of King Menelaus. So if you can see on that map, it goes all the way from Troy, all up the top right, all the way down to the somewhat bottom left to Sparta. Slaves met them as they met all strangers in the outer court and led them in to wash off the salt and the dust of the long journey. Now, I should note, in ancient Greece and through most of human history, there were slaves. So this isn't necessarily like in America when there was slavery and it was only African people. This is a slavery that was happening throughout history of different races, different nationalities. It's sad, but there were slaves through most of history. So anyhow, we've got slaves. And presently, clad in fresh clothes, they were standing before the king in his great hall, where the fire burned on the raised hearth in the center, and the king's favorite hounds laid sprawled about his feet. So you can see a bunch of dogs maybe around the fireplace. "Welcome to you, strangers," said Menelaus. "Tell me now who you are and where you come from, and what brings you to my hall." "I am a king's son, Paris by name, from Troy, far across the sea," Paris told him. "And I come because the wish is on me to see distant places, and the fame of Menelaus has reached our shores as a great king and a generous host to strangers." That doesn't sound like the real reason, does it, guys? But anyways, that's what Paris said. "Sit then and eat, for you must be way weary with such far traveling," said the king. So King Menelaus invites them in and has them sit down and maybe even eat. And when they were seated, meat and fruit and wine in golden cups were brought in and set before them. And while they ate and talked with their host, telling the adventures of their journey, Helen the queen came in from the women's quarters, 2 of her maidens following, one carrying her baby daughter, one carrying her ivory spindle and distaff laden with wool of the deepest violet color. And she sat down on the far side of the fire, the women's side, and began to spin. Back in those days, men and women might even sit in different areas. So this is a far off time from now, right? At least in most countries in the world now. And as she span, she listened to the stranger's tale of his journeying. So you can imagine she's kind of like doing some work with her cloth, and she's just listening in. And in little snatched glances, their eyes went to each other through the fronding hearth smoke. And Paris saw that Menelaus' queen was fairer, more beautiful even than the stories told, golden as a cornstalk and sweet as wild honey. And Helen saw, above all things, that the stranger prince was young. Turn this page for you guys. Here's the next picture. You can see that. Let me take that map down. There's the next picture. Menelaus had been her father's choice, not hers. And though their marriage was happy enough, he was much older than she was, with the first gray hairs already in his beard. Look at those gray hairs. There was no gray in the gold of Paris's beard, though. And his eyes were bright, and there was laughter at the corners of his mouth. Her heart quickened, and she looked at him. And once, still spinning, she snapped the violet thread. She was so excited. For many days, Paris and his companions remained the guests of King Menelaus, and soon it was not enough for Paris to look at the queen, to just look at her. He wanted more. Poor Oenone was quite forgotten, and he did not know how to go away, leaving Helen of the fair cheeks behind. So the days went by, and the prince and the queen walked together through the cool olive gardens and under the white-flowered almond trees of the palace. And he sat at her feet while she span her violet wool, and sang her the songs of his own people. And then one day the king rode out hunting. Paris made an excuse not to ride with him, and he and his companions remained behind. And when they were alone together, walking in the silvery shade of the olives, while his companions and her maidens amused themselves at a little distance, Paris told the queen that it was for the sight of her that he had come so far, and that now he had seen her, he loved her to his heart's core and could not live without her. "You should not have told me this," said Helen, "for I am another man's wife. And because you have told me, it will be the worse for me when you go away and must leave me behind." "Honey sweet," said Paris, "my ship is in the bay. Come with me now while the king, your husband, is away from home. For we belong together, you and I, like two slips of a vine sprung from the same stock." And they walked together, on and on through the hot noontide with the crickets chirring, he urging and she holding back. But he was Paris, who always got the things he wanted, and deep within her, her heart wanted the same thing. And in the end she left her lord and her babe and her honor, and followed by his companions, with the maidens wailing and pleading behind them, he led her down the mountain pass and through the passes to his ship waiting on the seashore. I'll show you that ship right now. There you go. So Paris had the bride that Aphrodite had promised him, and from that came all the sorrows that followed after. So this is the background. That's the end of chapter 1. This is the background of how war began, we're assuming at this point. So before we head out here, I want to ask you guys out there a couple questions. So one is, whom do you think you would have chosen as the fairest among those goddesses? Or would you have chosen at all? You know, because that's a dangerous choice, right? And I think it says something about you depending on who you choose, I think. So you've got Athena, you know, with the wisdom, Aphrodite, the beauty, and then Hera is really the power. So who would you have chosen? That's one thing to think about. The next one is, I'm curious, do you think it's right for Paris to steal off with Helen? Like, do you think it's right for them to cruise off and be like, we're out of here, you know? And is it a simple choice? Because, you know, it doesn't seem that easy, but do you think it's a simple choice for Helen to make at this point? So those are the questions I've got for you out there. I'm curious your responses. Also, what I liked to do when I was doing Read Aloud is at the end of each chapter, we would do a face. So you've got to put on a face of what this would look like. So for this one, it's the face of Helen. Let's see what I got here. When she made her fateful decision. So when Helen finally made the choice, I'm going to leave with Paris, what did her face look like? So I'm going to give you mine and then you attempt yours. Like, that's my Helen face. So I'm curious how, you know, I wish I could see you guys out there, but I'd like to see what your Helen face looks like, again, when she made that final choice, the fateful choice to go with Paris. All right, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed being with you. I wish I could actually see some people and be in a circle here and do Read Aloud like old school times, but, you know, we make do with what we have. So adios, everybody.